Welcome back to the virtual Woodhouse. This is actually the last session that we will have, even though World Economic Forum is also happening and continuing tomorrow. We do have a lot of sessions happening at the Female Quotient Lounge later this afternoon, and we have had many, many great conversations. As you know, today is the big ESG day. We as a company are running a virtual Woodhouse that we kicked off in person at COP in November, and we as a company are supporting the 17 global goals and goal number 7, supply clean energy. As some of you heard who were in the earlier session, today there was a really big session at the World Economic Forum around ESG matrix for sustainable future. So the conversation we just had was really around matrix frameworks reporting. How do we do this? And this session is nicely coming afterwards, because here we will talk more about action. We will talk about when we have done the measurement, where we have understood where we are, and we understand the gap to where we want to get to, what kind of sustainable digital transformation can we then initiate and work with. A couple of things I want to say before we go into the details of the session that was interesting for me to hear in the session with the World Economic Forum today is that ESG is becoming the core of how we run our business model and our processes. It's not anymore an obligation to work with an impact and sustainability mindset. It is how we do business. Having like a charity impact arm or having like a CSR entity within the company is not something that is like not like hanging and not part of your core of your company. Is actually should be embedded into how you run your business. So that was some of the core things. And then there was a huge conversation about how you correlate between the different ESGs. So when you drive a huge project, for example, with the net zero, the digital transformation to become net zero, at the same time, you make sure you get the D&I right. So a lot of excitement in the conversation, the World Economic Forum, the conversation we just had before this session here. So this session here is really around how we have ambition to create a more sustainable, resilient, and livable world. How do we do this? And we had an incredible COP26 where we were in person, where we spoke about amazing projects, where we are showcasing, not anymore just showcasing, we're actually doing it. We are transforming how we run our businesses. So I'll be moderating this exciting session together with me. We have Nick Jarrett, who is the Director, Sustainable Advisor Services for Wood. He literally are leading the Wood's sustainability practices and all our great advisory services, have an amazing background in project that he will be speaking about in this session here. Then we have Jacqueline Fitzgerald, Technical Solution Officer for North London Waste Authority. We have Amanda Gregory, Joint Nature Conservation Council. Sharon, CEO of SoCal, who just was one of the winners out of ESG, Entrepreneurship as a Sports. And then we have Charles Humphries, VP Sustainable Infrastructure from Woods. We have Chris Fassett, Director Waste Management at Woods. And then we have our great partner from Ernst & Young, Rich, Director for Energy Sector. And I know some of you I had the pleasure to be with at COP26. And I'm sorry that we now are in a Zoom setup, but hopefully we'll be able to convene in person again. But the fact is that we are not stopping the conversation. We are not stopping moving the needle forward. What I also would like to say have been the key topic for the entire week here at the Woodhouse at Davos, that people are really starting with what we committed at COP and how we are driving things moving, even though it's only 1.5 months ago. So the first thing I want to start with is to literally have just like a short introduction, like a minute or so of each of you about the work that you do, and I'll make sure I get the rest of the panelists in at the same time. So maybe Nick, you start leading this effort at Woods, and thank you for coming back to the virtual Woodhouse. It looks good on you.
No problems, no problems. Thanks, Anne. Yeah, we'll go around those introductions quickly, and then we've got a few spotlights to touch on some of the different areas of work that people are looking at. So as Anne said, Nick Jarrett, I lead our sustainability advisory work. Lots of interesting projects, a broad range of work across climate, energy, responsible consumption, sustainable infrastructure, and nature and water-based advisory work as well. So real great range, fascinating projects, fascinating people to work with, and it's a privilege to have the role and to join the call. Perhaps if we touch on Jacqueline and then Amanda, and then come to Chris and Charles from there.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Jacqueline Fitzgerald. I'm a Technical Solutions Officer for the North London Waste Authority. My background is in civil engineering. I've studied environmental engineering and sustainable development at Imperial College London. I've worked in consultancy doing research on sustainability, particularly the waste and resources sector. And for the last couple of years, I've worked at the authority, helping to deliver a very exciting project for London, the North London Keaton Power Project. So I'll talk about that more in a bit, I think.
Hi, sorry, Nick, I think it was me next.
Yes, yeah, go for it, Amanda.
I'm Amanda Gregory. I'm a Senior Overseas Territories Advisor for the Joint Nature Conservation Committee, or JNCC for much shorter. We are a UK public body, and we're focusing, I will touch on some of the slides later, but our key area of work is all things nature conservation, nature-based solutions, and how we can incorporate nature into business and into societal decision making.
Great stuff. Rich, hand to you.
Yeah, after some slight technical difficulties, thanks Anne for bringing me in. So hi everyone, and thank you for being here. So my name's Rich and I work at EY in the energy sector, and the purpose of my role is to help and educate clients on their sustainability journey and ultimately achieve their goals. And I think for me personally, this is the most important global conversation for decades and probably within my lifetime. And something which I often say to clients, which really resonates, is that ESG helps companies to change their mindset and move from a we contribute to society because we're successful to a we are successful because we contribute to society way of thinking. So yeah, thanks for having me, Nick.
Great stuff. Charles.
Hello everyone, Charles Humphries. I'm the Vice President of Sustainable Infrastructure for Wood in Emea. And my background really actually is environmental, although I lead largely engineering team. And my aspiration is to embed the environmental and the sustainability advice that we have in the business into the design phase and even pre-design phase into the planning phase, so that we come out with a more sustainable asset solution really, so that it can actually deliver on its asset potential for ESG, but also obviously in its adaptation later life stages as well.
And Chris.
Hi Nick, thanks very much. I'm Chris Fawcett. I'm Director of Water Management in Wood, and I've been very lucky enough to manage a series of projects related to natural capital with the JNCC in the overseas territories, which I'll come on to talk about a bit later on. But also my background is kind of a broad range of sustainable or sustainability and environmental projects across the breadth of sectors in the UK and in sort of broader water management projects more on a global basis.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thanks everyone. Thanks everyone. And what we'll do in this session is spotlight a few of the projects that we've been working on, working with North London Waste Authority and Jacqueline, and working with JNCC, and the work that those organisations are doing, and use those as a little bit of a hook for a bit of a conversation around the practical delivery that's going on out there in the world around the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And that practical element is very much the theme of where we're at as Wood and the engagement with the SDGs. I think as Wood, as consultancy, we've got a huge role to play in not just helping the conversation move forward and not just helping the awareness and the understanding around sustainability, but actually getting the sleeves rolled up, making practical change, changing the way that our clients operate, as you said, Rich, and changing the way that the people, the places, the infrastructure that we work with, changing how they are engaging with sustainability and engaging with all of the challenges around resilience, adaptation, climate, energy transition, etc., etc. And that practical element is a theme. Ambition is also a theme. We've got an ambition to create a more sustainable, resilient, and livable world, and it's nice and easy to have that as a tagline, and it's great, and every company likes to have it. But it's important, and it's important to be purpose-led as well as any organisation engaged in this landscape needs to be. The people that we're working with, the graduates coming in, are looking for that purpose. They're coming into this industry to make a difference, and we need to harness that. We need to work with that, and we need to let that flourish and deliver that difference. And that's hopefully what I think we'll see in the spotlights and the projects that we'll touch on over the next half an hour or so. The other kind of key word that I think to go with practical and ambitious is partnership. SDG 17 of partnerships for the goals is there for a reason, and no one organisation can make the difference by themselves. This isn't about consultancies competing with each other. It's not around who can do the best. It's about working together, and it's about collaboration to make that tangible difference. And I think that partnership really takes a number of forms. As consultants, we need to partner with our clients. We need to partner with other consultancies, other delivery organisations to bring the best teams, the best people together to solve the problem. But collectively, we also need to all partner with communities. None of our work, none of our projects happen independently of communities, of people living their day-to-day lives, and that's ultimately where we need to make a difference. We need to actively engage stakeholders and integrate communities into our work, and we've got to partner for innovation as well. We've got to do things differently. Repeating the same stuff isn't going to meet the challenge. We've got to keep pushing that innovation. And what I'm hoping we'll see over the course of this conversation is where the North London Waste Authority and JNCC are doing just that, in operating within communities, engaging with those communities, and driving those solutions. And we're pleased to play a small part in contributing to that work as well. But the real importance is the difference that's being made on the ground. So we'll kind of look at those spotlights. I'm sure after each one we'll take a bit of conversation and discussion as we go, and we'll see where the conversation takes us from there. So I will try my moment of truth and see if I can share a screen, although it's disabled. So Anne, perhaps if you can allow me to share my screen, I will stick some slides up and we'll go from there.
Yes, I just need you to give my host right back afterwards. So that would be good. So I give you the host right, so you should be able to have that. Just give it back afterwards. Here we go.
Great stuff. Okay, hopefully I've successfully shown some slides, and we should see a little bit around the North London Heat and Power project that I will pass over to Jacqueline on. Have I been successful? Not yet.
Not yet, no. Oh, something's happening.
There we go. If I press all of the buttons, I've got that.
Great. Brilliant. Right. So this slide I thought was helpful just to set some context for the project that I'll be talking about. So the North London Heat and Power project, this is the authority's plan for a world-class energy recovery facility which will replace the existing energy from waste plant and enable the North London Waste Authority to recover energy from our non-recyclable waste. So who are we? We are the North London Waste Authority. We're a statutory waste disposal authority here in the UK. We're responsible for collecting, for managing and treating the waste collected by the 7 North London boroughs, which represents a population of about 2 million residents. and we know that population is going to grow over the next 30 years. So we're the UK's second largest waste disposal authority, managing about 3% of the UK's waste. So managing this volume of waste, it does require modern, high-performing facilities, and this is what this project is about, providing these facilities. So this on the screen is our site in North London. It's a waste management eco park. It's a 16-hectare site, and within that eco park we have an existing plant that's been operational since the late 60s, but it's now reaching the end of its life, and we're looking to replace it. And the project, we are replacing it with very high quality assets. So what are those assets? Down the southern end of the site, which is the blue boxes down the southern end about boosting recycling in North London, that is the resource and recovery facility and a publicly accessible reuse and recycling centre. This represents a major investment in recycling in North London, and will enable North London to reach that coveted 50% recycling rate. And to the north of the site, we're constructing the energy recovery facility, which I mentioned. So that is a world-class facility. It'll enable us to divert 100% of our non-recyclable waste from landfill. And that's the equivalent of saving 215,000 tonnes of waste every single year, which is like taking 110,000 cars off the road. It'll enable us to generate low carbon heat and power. So the facility will generate enough power to provide electricity for around 127 homes. And we will also provide heat to a future district heating network. So this area of London is developing quite rapidly. Just down the southern end of the site, which you can't see here, but it's off the screen, is a large development of a couple of thousand homes and business, and we will be the anchor facility for that development, providing low carbon heat, and it'll be one of London's largest district heating networks. And that's been provided by the London Borough of Enfield. So a large development there. And also on the site, we're also developing Eco Park House, and this is providing a community hub for North London. So the purpose of Eco Park House, it's a 2-story building. It will be a visitor and education centre. So for the first time in the history of the Eco Park, we'll be opening up the park to invite people in to learn about waste management, about the carbon impact of waste management, about resource efficiency, and about climate change. So that's a great opportunity to engage our local communities in the sector and in the environment more generally. So yeah, that is the project in a nutshell. We're very proud of the project. We will have emissions, the highest emissions control standard of any plant in the UK, and we've made that investment in our facilities. We're very excited about this new infrastructure, and it'll enable us to manage our non-recyclable waste in a way that tackles the climate emergency. So that's the project in a nutshell. Hope I've done it justice.
Excellent stuff. Excellent stuff. I don't know whether you wanted to take some questions, or Charles, were you picking up on this slide?
Yeah, so I think as Jacqueline's already said, some of the actual credentials of the project are industry leading, certainly in the UK and indeed across Europe. And we've already mentioned some of the objectives, and they're sort of summarised on the left-hand side. I think for me, the piece here is on the right-hand side around absolutely integrating the community. That's critical. This is an end-of-pipe solution, and therefore the waste streams that come through to the facility are critical to be able to drive the sustainability objectives and actually achieve the outcomes they're looking for. But also for me, the word community is very important. The behavioural and cultural drivers to those waste streams becomes absolutely critical to actually achieving the endpoint that Jacqueline's been describing, and building in the education and bringing the community into the park so they can see how they actually contribute, how important segregation of waste is critical to being able to realise the potential. And that drives the ability and the need to continue to invest in the recycling infrastructure. I think the last point, though, is one that I'd just like to highlight is around the adaptation. And this is perhaps a principle that's quite close to me. as Jacqueline's already said, this is replacing an existing facility. It's being constructed around that facility, continuing to work because the need hasn't gone away as we construct the new facility. But the life cycle, the asset life is significant. You know, operating for 50, 60 years, making decisions now on what the community inputs, what the behaviours will be, the impact of the increasing momentum that we're seeing from COP and other drivers affects how the plant will operate. So it's really critical that we consider how those investment cycles work and how we drive change and allow plants to adapt, given the need, the feedstock, the behaviours, the technologies will change through that life cycle. And I think that's an area where the conversation is still starting, but from a practical application point of view, there aren't a huge number of opportunities in an asset life cycle to affect the way it's operating and therefore change the potential. And so you need to draw that thinking right up front into the early phase. And that's something that North London Waste Authority did very successfully in the permitting phase. Notwithstanding, that behavioural change will continue. And that becomes very interesting when you then start to optimise the plant and actually realise the potential.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right with that, and thank you, Jackie, thank you, Charles, for the overview of the project. What really strikes me on this one is the number of different elements across the SDGs that this touches on. We've talked around carbon, around energy, around responsible consumption, landfill, the intersection of those areas, and then the community element to that as well, coming as another layer. Those really kind of combining there, and I think waste is an area that's perhaps it's not quite as forgotten as it used to be, but can be quite selective in its appearance in the conversation around sustainability. It used to be that recycling was the area where waste got itself above the parapet and into the conversation, and then a few years ago, plastics blazed bright in global conversation for a while, and was a real example of how rapidly the global perception can shift around there. But the kind of nitty-gritty of day-to-day waste management is absolutely crucial in addressing our challenges around carbon, around net zero, around efficient use of resources. And projects like this, I think, are an essential part of that landscape. And when we were talking the other day, Jackie, you were talking about the ability through the scale in this to kind of nudge some of the local authorities and sort of edge the behaviours through as well. With that,
yeah.
And sorry, you far away.
Yeah, no, completely, and I agree with your point. It's the waste sector is kind of an underappreciated sector in its contribution to climate change, particularly when we get into the conversation on resource efficiency and the circular economy. I know that the UN, I was reading recently, has done some research where it showed that the consumption of resources contribute to greater than 50% of our global CO2 emissions and over 90% of the impact on nature and biodiversity. So we tend to kind of fall through the cracks there because of the nature of the industry. But and locally we talk a lot about recycling, but actually what's really important is that waste prevention element, and that's where you can really gain traction with engaging in local communities. So we've got a really strong waste prevention and communications teams, because this is extremely important to us, because ultimately we don't want to be dealing with this waste. We'd rather it was not produced in the first place, that it was being kept in circulation within society. So for example, we do a lot of outreach with communities. We launched the UK's first low plastic zone with groups of businesses around North London, signing them up to pledges to limit their use of single-use plastics. And it's a small initiative, but actually it's been really popular. It's been really great in engaging people because it's a confusing topic. People don't know what to do. So that's been really successful. COP, I think, demonstrated waste was not on the agenda in COP. It was quite disappointing. There were a lot of fringe events because people in the waste sector, they like to shout about this issue because it is very important. But to highlight the issue of waste ahead of COP, we launched a campaign called Not a Minute to Waste. And the research we did there that showed that Londoners produce 233 tonnes of waste every hour. That's the equivalent to 6 busfuls of waste every single hour is produced. So that's an absolutely massive amount of waste. So we had launched a massive communication campaign. We had billboards across North London, seen by over 1.5 million people. And as a result of that engagement, our chair of our authority was interviewed on ITV News, which is a national news channel in the UK. So yeah, engaging the communities, explaining to them really pays off in dividends. But there's a mountain of waste out there. Don't get me wrong. There's a lot to do. But our contribution to climate change, if we can really start to get serious about the circular economy, if we're serious about climate change, we have to engage the circular economy. We have to start talking more about it. People need to understand the complexities of the issue. We're not going to reach our climate change goals just by solving the renewable energy problem and the energy efficiency problem. That's only half the story. We have to look at consumption. Yeah, that's what I would like to raise, because it's not just about recycling rates. It's actually about what we're consuming in the first place.
Absolutely, and that build from consumption to a recycling mindset, and then pushing that from a recycling mindset to a circular thinking is the next level to take that through to. Rich, I was just
Can I ask a question?
Bring you in there as well. Yeah, fire away.
Yeah, it might be to Charles or Jacqueline, to be honest. So Nick, right at the very start, started talking about COP26, and I think most of us were there. But I think one of the things that I took away was the fact that it felt like it was the first time the private sector had a seat at the table, and that the private sector is actually part of the solution instead of just the problem. And then Nick, right at the very start, was talking about partnering with different organisations. So I just wondered, with this project, how you kind of found that at a strategic level right at the very beginning.
Jackie, do you want to take that as the client point of view, and then I'll give you a view from the private sector as a consultant, perhaps?
Sorry, Rich, do you mean working with the private sector?
Yeah, exactly. So so the public sector, private sector have come together to create what looks like a great project, and then involving communities and stuff as well. So just any learnings that anyone could take away from that, I suppose.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, the public sector, I think we're in a privileged position in that we're given the opportunities to invest in real projects like this, projects that are really pushing the forefront of what's possible. So we have we always had a master vision for our project, in that it would be engaging, it would be outwardly focused. I mentioned that the Eco Park in North London, it was first construction in the 60s, and the architecture even of the waste management park was very inwardly focused. It was don't look at us, we're the dirty thing in the corner. Whereas actually this project was about opening up the Eco Park. We're located right next to a large green park, and for the first time we've leased land within that park, and looked about enhancing that urban location, and leveraging the partnership with the private sector as well, bringing in those ideas and innovations. We were able to produce a facility that I think that it's a landmark really for London, because of that sort of public sector vision combined with the innovation of the private sector. So certainly that sort of private public partnership was instrumental in this project.
Yeah, just to add, as a private sector consultant working with North London were early on. It's a move that we've seen across much of both the waste sector, but across the infrastructure sectors as a whole. There are resource challenges, so there's very practical needs to partner as organisations to satisfy the needs that the engineering infrastructure projects have across the UK and across Europe. But actually, it serves to drive the innovation piece. You get a higher performing team by getting those interfaces working properly, but it needs an environment created by the client that allows that and actually doesn't drive competition, because that competition becomes introspective. Yeah, the partnership model has allowed North London Waste, and it's grown over time. It has developed, I think, to drive more of the innovation, and it actually pushes us more so to innovate and to be able to drive improvements than it would otherwise. There's no inter-panel, and we're one of a number of technical advisors. So it gives the resilience and it drives the innovation, I think, in terms of sort of the outcomes. But if you don't get that environment right and you don't set it up early enough, the competition will kill those benefits. Rich.
Great stuff. Great stuff. Thanks, thanks, Jacqueline. Thanks, Charles. We'll switch the. I was going to say other end of the spectrum there, but I'm not sure whether I should say that. Maybe we can challenge me on that later on. We'll switch from sustainable infrastructure to working with nature, which is where I feel maybe I shouldn't have said different ends of the spectrum. We'll also switch ourselves from North London to the Caribbean, and given that we're in the depths of January, that'll give us a bit of brightness here in the UK. I'm going to stop sharing, and Amanda, I'm hoping that you're able to share your screen and take us through a bit of overview of your role and what you're doing with the JNCC in the Caribbean.
Nick, if you give Amanda the hosting right, then she can share. Or you give it back to me. You can also do that.
How do I do that?
I just reclaim the host and then I give it to Amanda. Yeah.
Yep. Okay.
Okay, good. There you go, Amanda. Share.
Great, thank you very much. Let me just share my screen. Can you see this now?
Perfect.
Yep. Fabulous, thank you. Just to very quickly go through, I'm Amanda Gregory. We've said our introductions, Senior Overseas Territories Advisor for the Joint Nature Conservation Committee. Just to let you know who JNCC is, we're a UK public body and we provide independent advice to UK government and the devolved administrations of England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland on international nature conservation. And we aim to provide high quality evidence and advice. And we work on the science policy interface, so we're able to provide practical policy relevant solutions. And we work through, to do this, a shared service, and that's a shared service with governments and other public bodies, but also in collaboration and partnership with businesses such as Wood and also the society. Our activities are varied, which include providing scientific advice on marine protected areas, and this is the UK's offshore waters. We provide advice on nature conservation to the offshore industries, oil, gas, wind farms and shipping. We provide international advice to support UK negotiations, to strengthen relationships between the UK, EU and global science. And we also provide and undertake reporting for the biodiversity and nature conservation international multilateral environmental agreements, such as Ramsar and the Convention on Biological Diversity. We also are the scientific authority for wildlife trade and CITES. Today we're looking at natural capital, and this is our role here is about increasing awareness of the value of the natural environment and supporting economic growth and underpinning people's well-being. We work with the 16 islands of the 14 UK overseas territories. And today, as Nick said, we're focusing on the beautiful Caribbean islands. So the tropical warm waters of the UK Caribbean overseas territories are highly biodiverse, but also vulnerable. Coral reefs, mangroves, salt ponds, seagrass beds all provide shelter and food to diverse communities of animals, including feeding and nesting grounds for turtles, wetlands for birds and nurseries, and spawning grounds for many species of fish and corals. These coastal habitats are also hugely important culturally, benefiting the health and well-being of island communities, as well as supporting economic prosperity. Nearshore and coastal habitats play an extremely important role in mitigating the effects of natural hazards and protecting coastal communities, infrastructure and livelihoods against the destructive power of tropical storms. The natural resilience of the Caribbean overseas territories to storm-induced flooding is dependent upon the health and abundance of these key habitats. Over 80% of the population of the UK's overseas territories live in the hurricane-prone Caribbean and Western Atlantic, and many businesses, infrastructure and communities are located in the coastal areas. The unprecedented hurricane season of 2017 really highlighted the environmental and economic damage that such events can inflict on small island communities, with estimated damages of around $3,177 million to the 3 overseas territories of Anguilla, British Virgin Islands and Turks and Caicos alone, just as a result from the 2 hurricanes Irma and Maria. These estimated damages included loss of economic incomes, social services being provided, physical damage to infrastructure, but did not include impacts upon the environment or the cost of environmental and ecosystem service loss. Therefore, the environment was underreported, underregarded, and undervalued. And while this continues, the environment will lose out again and again in land management decisions. Recognising the importance of this information to the territories, JNCC extended our programme of work on natural capital to aim of demonstrating how nature already performs a remarkable job in protecting the communities from tropical storms, but how we can measure this in the same way as the loss of infrastructure and give the environment an economic value that can be guide decision making in the territories. And Chris will highlight some of these studies that we've undertaken. The work that we're doing in the territories supports a number of MEAs, and JNCC does report on these. In particular, the SDGs, 13 on climate action, but also the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction, Target E, and the Convention on Biological Diversity, post-2020 targets for biodiversity, and also the UN climate change targets as well. So the work also provides a unique opportunity to integrate nature-based solutions into the national and local disaster risk reduction and climate strategies for the overseas territories, therefore supporting wider overseas territories and UK government policies. It should also be noted that the outputs from the projects that Chris is just going to outline also contribute to many other projects, such as marine spatial planning, waste management is also in there as well, Jacqueline and Charles, so it is part of what we look at as well. But also directly, the economic valuation of the coastal protection services have fed into for the first time ever into national ecosystem accounts for each of the Caribbean's UK's overseas territories. This is what I'm going to say now. Thank you very much. I'm going to hand over to Chris to describe some of the work a little bit further.
Thank you, Amanda. Nick's going to get control again.
I will hand it over, Chris. I'll just request it.
So whilst Nick's keying up the slides, I'm Chris Fawcett, Technical Director at Wood, and we've been lucky enough to work with the JNCC over the past 4 or 5 years to help with the ecosystem services and natural capital work that has been undertaken. And I'm going to talk very briefly initially about the work that we've undertaken in the British Virgin Islands, and then how we've been extending that work and is ongoing in the Cayman Islands and the Turks and Caicos. Yeah, initially on the BVI. So the British Virgin Islands are located about 60 miles east of Puerto Rico. They're characterized by steep vegetated topography, white sandy beaches, and the islands support a diverse range of habitats and endemic species and endangered species, and also have one of the largest, or the world's largest, Great Barrier Reefs off the island of Anegada. And as a result of this, the BVI is a tourist hotspot with sort of out of the hurricane season, with vast numbers of tourists coming in, not only by plane, but on boats, as you can see on this picture here. But that economy, as a result, they've come to see the natural environment and to enjoy the natural environment of that. So the BVI economy is very much reliant on the environment. And as Amanda has highlighted, the government is really understanding and wants to recognise the value of natural capital and ensure that it's recognised in government decision making. And as a result, there is a sort of unprecedented need to start expressing the economic value of the natural environment into government decision making, into its fiscal planning and policy development. And in this way, by doing this, the role of the environment can really be highlighted and can ensure that it's definitely really considered and very important in all decision making. As Amanda highlighted, in 2017, the BVI was hit by 2 hurricanes, which caused a large amount of devastation, which the island is really sort of still recovering from at this moment. Next slide, please. So in this example, we really have centered in on the role or the value that natural capital plays on flood protection. So the flood protection service that it provides. And the project was really good because it is involved a diverse range of different specialisms. There are economists, marine engineers, meteorologists involved in these types of projects. Coral reefs and mangroves are highly effective at dissipating wave energy, and so they play a pivotal role in the natural flood mechanisms, mitigation of the natural flood mechanisms. So what the slide shows here is the location of key coral reefs around Tortola, which is the main island in the BVI, with the annual flood protective value that they provide. And this valuation was undertaken using an avoided damages approach, which, in quick summary, the flood hazard was estimated through the use of developing some physical coastal models that were able to incorporate the dissipative effects of wave energy. And then the model was run using or driven by a range of different hurricane events of different magnitudes and frequencies to understand the flood extent that each of those would occur. And each of those flood layers was then overlaid against the infrastructure around the island to understand what infrastructure was hit and was flooded. And as a result of that, we were able to look at understanding what the economic loss of that flooding was, both through damages to the infrastructure, but also by business disruption. And so we undertook this process based on the background, extent and quality or condition of the natural environment of the coral reefs and the mangroves that surround the island, but then repeated that by running through different layers of habitat condition and extent to represent sort of damage to the coral reefs, and also through a scenario of coral reef loss. And by undertaking that, looking at the differences between those, you can understand the role and the value that those reefs undertake. And so in this circumstances in the BVI, it shows that on an annual basis, those reefs are worth $94 million US, which in the context of the BVI economy is about 10% of the GDP. So you can see from that they play a significant role. And maps like this, which show values that are very much linked to where there is built infrastructure, those are really useful tools to help, or be the first point of call for looking at opportunity around building on natural sort of nature-based solutions to help improve and enhance that flood mitigation. Next slide, please, Nick. So that was one component of the work that we've undertaken for the British, in the British Virgin Islands for the JNCC, but is only one part of a kind of growing portfolio of work that has been undertaken. And again, we've been very lucky to work with the JNCC on this. So we're in the process now of packaging up these models and other models that we're developing in the Cayman Islands and Turks and Caicos. So we're packaging these models up into tools that can be used by government officers in those islands. So they are then able to use those tools to run different scenarios to understand how and where they can use nature-based solutions. So we're running training for those organisations. We're also extending the valuation framework. We're looking specifically at a coral reef valuation framework, which will be deployed initially in the Cayman Islands and then the TCI, but then can be used by the JNCC and other overseas territories to understand sort of the value of the much wider ecosystem services that those coral reefs provide. And lastly, we are working with the governments to understand what are the key environmental indicators, what are the key indicators that they need to be monitoring to understand long-term environmental condition, and also short-term environmental condition before and after disasters. So really a key set of tools that governments in those overseas territories can use to help them use the natural environment to help them support disaster resilience. Just going back to Nick's point about collaboration at the start, on all of these projects, we have been working with the client and with the sort of government departments and various agencies there to ensure that we're targeting the right solutions and involving the right people to ensure that at the end of these we can provide materials that can be used by those in the country.
Cool, great stuff. Thank you, Amanda. Thank you, Chris, for giving that highlight. And I'm just going to leave this slide up there for a second, because I think one of the key themes that comes out from this work is the importance of nature as an asset, and an asset-based way of thinking about nature, and that's really what the concept of natural capital is about. But it's an asset you can invest in. It's an asset you can deplete. It's something that offers value and provides protection, as we've seen in this example, the value of coral reefs in reducing the impacts of coastal flooding. to which the BVI is particularly vulnerable with respect to tsunamis and storm surge with hurricanes. But bringing that in and starting to think about nature in that natural capital framework starts to integrate that thinking into the decision-making frameworks that are in place, into the budgeting, into the government actions, into policy, and it drives a different way of thinking. The BVI are very lucky to have someone like Joseph Smith-Abbott who leads out on this stuff within the government, who is a real strong advocate of integrating nature into government decision making, and through that process is starting to shift the needle on how the BVI engages with its environment, and start to think of it as an asset to invest in rather than a resource that can be used. And the other kind of perspective, I guess, here is the word resilience on this. Quite often, I think in the conversation around resilience, people use resilience and protection interchangeably, and often when they say resilient, they mean protected. Building a bigger flood defence isn't necessarily making things more resilient. It's just building a bigger flood defence. Adaptation and adaptive capacity is just as much a part of resilience, and I think that the role of nature and nature-based solutions in providing an adaptive capacity to change and delivering resilience is another essential theme out of this, that really is absolutely aligned with the SDGs and aligned with that overlapping and stacking of the different challenges that the SDGs address, and the intersection of all of that. I wonder if anyone else has any other questions or anything for Chris or Amanda as going through things.
I was just going to highlight something that you said earlier about making a difference on the ground, and the work really is about making a difference, and that link between the economy and nature and the environment is so closely felt in the territories anyway, that they live and breathe this every day, and we're kind of feel a little bit more away from nature when you're in the UK and you're working. You don't work in the same way, so I think they feel it, they live it, and they breathe on the islands. They understand the implications. So it is really nice that you can make a difference on the ground with these projects directly and see that progression through. And as you rightly said, in British Virgin Islands, all the way through to the indicators being up for adoption as part of their fiscal budgeting from the work that JNCC and Wood did 2 years ago. So it really has made a difference.
No,
and I think just to add to that, Nick and Amanda, I think what we've seen through visits to the BVI in the context of this work is that how Joseph Smith-Abbott is say desperate, but really keen to kind of really get the information out of him, to share with his colleagues, to support, to ensure that where there are decisions to be made around developments around the island that are sort of critical to the overall economic development of the country, that they are taken with due consideration to the environment. And I think the south coast of Tortola is a good example of that, where in previous years the mangroves have been pulled out to make way for developments, but without the sort of due consideration for the role that they play, not only for biodiversity, but in the case of coastal protection. So we've certainly seen evidence of how they're really keen to take the kind of work that the JNCC are doing and sort of communicating that to the wider government and to help them with overall decision making.
And this is also, sorry, this is also sort of just looking at coastal protection services. We have done similar for inland flooding and also landslides and erosion risk as well.
Yeah, the BVI in particular is a spectacular aggregation of natural hazards and vulnerability to climate change that it just keeps layering on top of each other and building. I was wondering, and I'm conscious of looking at the clock. I could quite easily keep talking around sustainable infrastructure, nature-based solutions, SDGs for the rest of the day and the rest of the week. But in terms of, I guess, getting a perspective from everyone in the group as a bit of a sort of round table and reflection, we've heard around sustainable infrastructure, the waste circularity, responsible consumption angle around North London waste. We've seen the perhaps the other side of the coin around nature-based solutions, the role of natural capital in resilience and sustainability as well, and both areas of driving things forward and pushing the ambition around the SDGs. But I wondered, from the work that everyone's involved with and the perspectives that people have got, where would you like that to be? If we cast our minds out, say 5 years into the future, where would you like to see the endpoint of this having moved forwards to, and the ambition around delivering sustainability practically on the ground through these ones? And I wondered maybe Rich, to put you on the spot of not having sort of seen these projects and kind of being reacting to it, but from your perspective at EY around those themes, where would you see our ambition needs to be over the next few years?
So I think for me personally, I think the ambition's great, and you mentioned right at the start, Nick, it's really easy to have an ambition, but now it's, especially with COP and with the announcement that everyone needs to have sustainability plans that are public companies anyway by 2023, I think that now everyone needs to move to the action stage. And I was fortunate enough to listen to a few minutes of the previous call to us, and they were saying exactly the same thing, that it doesn't matter if you fail, but as long as you fail fast, and then we can start again. So I think that's it really. In 5 years, I want us to be in a much better place, because I don't think there's any excuse other than people's pace and getting organisations to think more broadly and educating communities. Which, yeah, the North London project sounded great. So yeah, much more of them, please, Jacqueline. Much more of them.
Definitely.
Well, Jacqueline, we might hand to you there on the
yeah, this is a hard one because there's just so many challenges. I think on a practical level and just my project experience, I think educating people within the whole project supply chain, right from the top down to the very, people on site digging the ditches essentially. Everyone needs to understand that the little decisions they make, no matter how big or small they are, they do have an impact. And just practically on the design, when you're trying to make the case for environmental initiatives on a project, it's not easy. There's still an attitude of, well, I've got time cost program. So yeah, 5 years time, maybe just increasing that education piece. I think actually I did join the end of the last conversation. I think someone said about joining up finance and engineers, and I completely agree with that. Bringing the procurement supply chain in sooner. Not just moving away from the engineers, but joining up the engineers, the managers with those who make procurement decisions as early in the piece as possible. Yeah, that would practically sort of grease the wheels a little bit, sort of from a delivery practical perspective.
Yeah, I think that was an excellent point on the back end of the previous call around that. Charles, I'll come around to you next.
I'm just going to extend that a little bit further and give an example of one of the conversations that we had before, and specification of concrete in a project is no good to specify concrete products which may have less embodied carbon but actually aren't structurally safe later down the line. I think that there's a need to drive some of the core principles and the core materials that we use in construction. So that's one thing. I'd like to see that take a step forward. But actually the big one for me is around adaptation, designing in an ability for an asset to adapt as technology progresses. So we see modular construction being very popular for cost and schedule purposes, but actually there's little environmental driver in that decision-making process. We know technology is advancing very quickly. We know that behaviours and the needs of an asset, the needs of a community, which is what the needs of the asset addressing, are changing quickly. So how do we design assets, and how do we procure assets? How do we invest at the right time in the asset life cycle to adapt that asset itself? How do we build them so that actually we can plug and unplug technologies to allow better performance? We aren't now designing assets which are going to stay in a steady state for 50 years. That time is gone, and if we do that, then we're losing the potential of the innovation and development over that period. So how do we actually embed that into the design thinking? How do we give consultants, how do we give advisors, how do we give the engineering and environmental communities enough space, enough time up front, and enough room to fail to actually drive that innovation? And how do you do that in parallel to a direct need to replace an asset which is going to fall over in X number of years' time? And if you're not careful, you create a conflict. And I think modularization and adaptation is the way to allow us to get things as right as we can now, as good as we can now, and then adapt that facility as the innovation happens.
I think that adaptive planning aspect is absolutely crucial. Amanda, same perspective.
Yeah, it's really interesting because we see so much innovation and technological advances, but organizations, businesses don't necessarily bring the environment into that thinking early enough. How are these advances impacting the environment? How do they sit within the environment and within communities? And I would really like to see the environment brought in at an earlier stage in discussions on an equal footing as any other sector. If you're thinking about procuring equipment, bring the environment in. What is the carbon costs? What is the impact on nature and biodiversity? How can businesses work if they're just extending a premises? How can they work within their environment? They're not just building a square block on the side. How is it integrated into the environment? And that way we can start working with nature better. We can start facilitating working with, not against. Or it's not that we're working against nature, we're not thinking about it when we're doing the designs. And I don't necessarily think it's intentional, but we've got to change the conversation, and we've got to change the starting point, because without the nature, without our working environment, what do we actually have? What are we working to in the future? It doesn't exist. It means our costs continually go up because we're having to clean the water for us to drink. But whilst we're doing that, it's also running through the rivers and aquifers and killing off biodiversity, whether it's soil biodiversity or the rivers. So we've just got to think about what we're doing at a much earlier scale, earlier timetable.
Yeah.
That's what I would like. That's where I think, well, we have to go. We don't actually have a choice. We have to start doing it. But I have seen a big change in the last 2 years where nature-based solutions and the environment weren't part of the Hyogo framework or the Sendai framework. They came in, that understanding that nature actually provides resilience has slowly started creeping in, and that it can support our economies and protect our economies in the future, which is a good starting point. It's creeping in, and I think that momentum will continue.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think the element there you said around thinking differently about nature, but actually thinking about it in the first place, that it's often easier to change people's thinking if it's already in there, but getting it embedded and getting it onto the agenda at the earliest possible opportunity, I think is the hook that is coming into play, and we've seen that over the last few years. Chris, very swiftly from you, and then Anna will come back to wrap us up.
Just to build on what was said previously, in carrying context, what would be really good is to see that any new development is really the environment is embedded in the decision making and all decisions, essentially, such that right from the very outset, the impacts that project might have on the types of things that we've discussed already. So there's due consideration to those impacts, and such there is no deterioration and enhancement. So the concepts of environment net gain is what I'd like to see in developments going forward. So yeah,
great stuff. And I think from my perspective, the bit that I'd reflect on at a very big picture level is I'd like to be in a position where in a few years' time, conversations like this don't feel special. At the moment, it feels like talking around this is something that a small group of people is doing and trying to drive forward. And if in a few years' time, no one's interested in having a distinct and separate conversation around how we're going to drive forward sustainability, how we're going to do this, because it's just what happens, that would be wonderful. Albeit that it may be I was going to say doing us out of a job. It won't be doing us out of a job. It will do us out feeling special about doing the job that we do. We'll be just be run-of-the-mill consultants rather than the people that are saving the planet. And on the context of saving the planet, Anne, back to you for some final words to wrap us up.
Thank you so much, Nick. And it couldn't have been said better. I think we all should always feel special, but we shouldn't feel it to do what we do here. It should be the new normality. So what you represent is a new normality. I will say my hope is really high based on fourth day into World Economic Forum, and what I've heard the speaker at the forum is that it is really becoming the core of the way you run a business, the way you are talking about sustainability. So I think, even though I know you have been on this journey for many years, including myself, but I think it is becoming the way we do businesses today. And also what you touch on, the public-private partnership, because nobody can do anything alone. And I think in one of our earlier conversations this morning here in the Virtual Woodhouse, the whole thing about public-private partnerships is becoming also the new normality, when it was not just for a couple of years ago. So I think, to your point, Nick, as you said, this year is now becoming the way of doing it going forward. So I want to thank you. It was a great way to end our sessions. There's been many conversations the last 4 days aligned with the World Economic Forum agenda. And by closing, by showing some really solid projects, we'd already have drive big impact, was a great way to end the Woodhouse at Davos. But I will say we are not like ending totally, because World Economic Forum is still going on, a lot of great sessions still going on. And also we are now hopping over to the to the Female Quotient Lounge that we are running together with, have done the whole week, and we are continuing the conversations. So for you who want to do and jump over to that platform, which is also on the Wood site, the upcoming conversation is the woman behind the sustainable lifestyle brands that are changing the markets. Second session is women on the path to a new zero world. And the next one is how diversity in leadership in creating a more diverse food system. Because if you look at the food system right now, this is being totally, to what you talked about, Amanda, the food system is becoming plant-based. We talk about plant-based seafood. Just to mention one, what does that not mean for the whole issue that we have around the ocean? But what we need to make sure, which has also been a big conversation doing what you spoke about, and also doing this week in collaboration with the World Economic Forum, is that the ESG, the SDGs, they are correlated. So you cannot just do really well in the net zero journey and not make sure the D&I is fixed at the same time. So there's a huge correlation between the SDGs. So big thanks to all of you. Thank you for everything you do. And Nick, you know, I'm a big fan of you and your team. As much as I can, I talk about it to everybody I can talk about it, because you guys represent the real work that needs to be done. So thank you so much. Big thanks from the virtual Woodhouse. Some of you I saw in the real Woodhouse would still exist in Glasgow. And I hope to see you again soon, not just on Zoom, but in the real world out there. So stay safe out there, and thank you so much for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. Thank you.